Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. The reason I've got my arm just off to the side is because I'm on my own today with Indy, my dog. He is here today, and just to actually prove he really is, there he is. That's Indy. Everyone else believed, or lots of people believed, that he didn't actually exist. He does. I'm going to let him lie down. But yeah, the reason I actually showed him as well is because we haven't had our post delivered yet. So at any point as this goes on, he could go absolutely mad. So just want to set the scene there. Unusual way to start a Spurs video, I know. But I just wanted to make that very clear, what could happen at any point through it, due to the incredibly professional standard that I set in these. Heavy sarcasm there, in case anyone didn't spot it. Right, so we've got loads to talk about, absolutely loads, which is why the chance of an Indy bark is incredibly likely during this whole exercise, because I'm sure we'll be going by the time the postman comes. The only place to start, actually, without going into any other details about other stuff, of course, is Antonio Conte. Obviously best wishes with him right now, because Spurs revealed today that he's... I'll just read their statement, it's probably easiest. Antonio Conte recently became unwell with severe abdominal pain following a diagnosis of cholecystitis. I think I've said that right there eventually. He will be undergoing surgery to remove his gallbladder today, Wednesday, and will return following a period of recuperation. Everyone at the club wishes him well. From what I understand, his return's unclear at this point. They've got to, it's very much dependent on how the procedure goes, and of course the recovery time that is estimated for him once that's all done. I think Spurs are going to provide a bit of an update after the surgery, so whether that ends up being later today or tomorrow, it's unclear. Obviously, we're meant to have a press conference with Antonio on Friday afternoon. You'd imagine that's unlikely to be him now. It would be more likely to be Christian Stellini, but obviously it's just speculation until we find out exactly what's happening with him. So yeah, really rubbish news. Obviously we're dealing with all the fallout of the transfer window stuff. Very late last night, trying to sort everything out that happened with that. And then of course today we get that news, which is absolutely rubbish for him. Sounds horrible. Sounds really, really horrible. So hopefully back on the men soon, and how that all goes. Yes, not good. Poor Antonio Conte. Absolutely rubbish. Right. Away from that, though, we talk about the transfer window. So the reason I was slightly stumbling there is because I can hear the postman just put something through the door, and Indy has actually been very good. And he hasn't actually gone mad as of yet, which means it'll happen at some point, like an ice cream truck will come by, which it shouldn't do in February. But the transfer window, really need to get back on track with this. Indy is absolutely making me even less professional than normal. So the transfer window, we got there. We got to the end of it. Just about 10 minutes before 11 o'clock, Pedro Porro was finally announced. I know, obviously, I did the last video, and very much, I'd hope you took my tone from it, that I was very much saying Sporting had been quite awkward in negotiations, so, anything could happen. Anything did. But we got there. And it was such a weird transfer window because it was pretty much everyone's eyes were on Daniel Levy, really. About whether he could improve, I guess Spurs and Conte's prospects for the second half of the season. The answer was just about. I do think Spurs have improved their squad. I do think they have, and I'd say they've improved their team because of Porro. Was it enough? We'll see. Of course, I'm pretty much in the camp of a little bit more could have been done, but I'm also probably in line with most managers in football. I think Jose Mourinho once said it. Every manager wants more out of the transfer window. and I do. I had the same feeling, to be fair. I had the same feeling last January. I remember very well that I felt they could have done a bit more than just the two. And those two turned out to be transformational to the season. So I'm pinning my hopes on that. But yes, I do believe that a little bit more could have been done. Although I also, we're going to talk about it later, essentially, without being around the bush, I do feel like another centre-back could have been a big thing. Because I think this is the issue. You know, I've spoken about it before, said in December, Spurs' priorities for this window were a new right wing back and attacking player. They delivered both of those in Arnaut, Danjuma and Pedro Porro. However, the issue lies with the interpretation, I guess, of what those priorities should have been. The club's priorities were those two positions. I think most people outside, probably including myself, had seen a team that shipped 21 goals in 10 games, yet with a third highest scorer in the Premier League. So, to me, that screams defenders. I don't know. It might just be me, but that's kind of, I don't think it is, judging by social media, but that's, it seems that should have really been the thing. I mean, and you could argue, even going further the other way, that maybe when you already had 3 attacking wing-backs, including one who signed in the summer, hadn't even really been used yet, and obviously with those goals that have been scored, maybe a new forward and attacking wing-back were probably less of a priority than maybe an upgrade in central defence. But I am not the club. I wish I could make decisions for the club because they make some rotten ones. As we'll come to find out, or we'll talk about as this video goes on. Yeah, I suppose I was going to play devil's advocate. Conte would have argued maybe that in terms of defence, the last 4 of the last 6 games they've kept clean sheets. Of course, you could argue back 2 of those have come against lower league opposition in the cup competitions, and also 2 signings last January, 2 huge signings that changed the course of the season. So Spurs will be hoping that these do. Porro, I think, could be certainly transformational in terms of, I've said it a million times, that right wing back and who plays in it, or both of the wing backs, it makes Conte's system tick. And we know that it's no secret, especially if he's not going to play Jed Spence, that right wing-back slot has not produced the results, apart from when Matt Doherty's really been on song. Matt Doherty, farewell. But we'll talk about that. Oh my goodness, there's so much to talk about Matt Doherty. But having the right wing-backs makes the whole system, it's like when you're playing some kind of Crystal Maze game where you've got to get all the right gears into the right places. Suddenly you get those and everything, the machine starts to turn properly. And that's what, hopefully, Porro will do. I was watching a little behind-the-scenes video of him, actually, just before I started this. He seems quite a bubbly character. He's got a little bit of the Sergio Reguilon about him in that. Looks like a bit of a joker, kind of playing up to the camera quite a lot. Seems to have a bit of English as well. Obviously, he was at Man City, but he kind of wasn't at Man City. Those 3 years or so, he seemed to be constantly on loan. But presumably, he did his interview in... sorry, Indy's actually snoring now. I don't know whether it's loud enough to come across on the video, but yes, this is going to be a fun, distraction-filled video. But Porro, yeah, I don't know how great his English is, and he did the interview in Spanish, but certainly looks to be that he's going to be able to hold conversations, and certainly seems to be understanding what people are asking him to do as well. But yeah, honestly, he's got everything about him to potentially become world class. He's a very, very, very good player now, Champions League player. So that is, I do feel he's an upgrade in that role, with no disrespect to anyone previously there, but more in terms of being a ready-made player than Jed Spence. Yes, of course. Despite only being, a year older. But he just has that top-flight experience behind him. So, yeah, I do think it's a terrific signing. But I think we need to talk about the way it happened. So, he was their top target for months. As I said before, Spurs have looked at him a long, long time. There were only some question marks over whether for Conte he was the right man in terms of physicality. Was he, the big strapping 6 foot kind of beast that Conte often likes to have across the pitch in every role? No, but certainly very, very talented player in that position as well. Yet their top target for months, he was signed 10 minutes. Well, he was announced 10 minutes before the 11 p.m. deadline on transfer deadline day. Only Tottenham Hotspur. It really is. What I would say, and I'm going to be quite critical of them in this video in various other aspects. What I would say of Porro, there's different sides to this. There's, I think, the sporting side to this. And yeah, the release clause, which there's very differing versions of what exactly that entailed. But I just kind of feel like the biggest irony for me was that Daniel Levy is going into a transfer deal that, let's be honest, is going to have a huge bearing on the vitriol that's going to come his way for the second half of the season. If Porro works and becomes an absolute star, then I guess it's almost like for some he'll be the hero that came in and saved the deal. Which was very convenient that it got have played out that way. A cynical person might say too convenient. But, if he does, then yes, obviously they've made an important deal that's made a big difference. Had they not got over the line, oh my goodness, I think the growing discontent, the chants that you hear at matches, and that protest, the small but noisy protest that was heard at Hotspur Way a couple of Saturdays back, all of that I think would have grown and grown and grown and grown. It would have been absolutely disastrous. So I think there's a certain irony that dealing or trying to get a deal across the line of that nature, Daniel Levy would come up against essentially his Portuguese equivalent. With Sporting doing a lot of things that some I can go into, some I can't, because I wasn't able to get some of them double, sourced, which is always my way. I always want to get everything at least double sourced. But certainly coming up against a lot of instances and negotiating tactics that I'm fully aware, having spoken to many people, many agents, many people at other clubs, that Daniel Levy has done himself to other clubs over the years. So, yeah, there is a huge dollop of irony that's the deal that really relied on him working with such people as well. Because, look, we have to make this very, very clear. Sporting had no real desire to sell Pedro Porro, and that was the biggest obstacle from the start in all of this. They made this clear for weeks, and then there's this release clause, which I've heard so many different versions of this, and from people involved around the deal as well. Actually getting this pinpointed what it means, I've heard that the deal itself was only active for the first almost 2 weeks of the window, slightly more. I've heard that it had a notice period on it that had to be triggered, which kind of is the same thing, because if the notice period, let's say, was 2 weeks, it would mean you'd only have the first 2 weeks. I think if that were to be true, it's to protect the selling club from losing their player right at the last second and having no way to replace him. But then there's also a third version, which I saw in the Portuguese media, that the clause actually was only ever active in the summer transfer window. There seems to be no kind of, what's the best way, corroboration of exactly what this clause was. So this is why, if it's any of the former, then yeah, absolutely. I'm 100% in the camp of, oh my goodness, why didn't you just go early? Because they were prepared to, sounds like in the end, just to get it done, they were prepared to meet the clause. But if that is the case, why wasn't that done early? So, but I'm not fully stepping into that camp because I can't get a definitive pin down on exactly what this release clause details were. Because even in the Portuguese media, I've seen different versions. In the English media, I've seen different. I've noticed a lot of the English media ones have kind of stepped away from reporting on a release clause because I think it's because of these discrepancies in the versions of it. So yeah, I can't really go too far down that side. But Spurs were getting somewhere. You could tell that in my last video. They were gradually getting somewhere. And then it may well be because I recorded a video and the imbalance in the earth suddenly decided to shift in another direction. There was definitely this feeling that Sporting were dragging out negotiations. I think I said that before. And then suddenly on Sunday, big problems started to happen. And then that saw like real kind of late night issues. The scheduled medical for Monday was suddenly yanked off of the timetable. Pedro Porro himself was very, very unhappy apparently about it all. And the whole deal was hanging in the balance. So yes, lots of posturing, lots of brinkmanship. You had kind of both sides kind of trying to clearly get their side of the story. You could see the English reports, you could see the Portuguese reports. There's Portuguese reports stating that I think it was falling down over, was it admin fees over like 2.6 million or something. And Spurs obviously just putting it out there. There was a lot of talk about frustrations, and it's just quite funny how the whole brinkmanship stuff goes. But they returned to the table on Monday, and whatever the differences ended up being, they were overcome. And there was also another interesting element to the deal, and I think this was maybe why Sporting was so reluctant to initially sell in this window, was that they, from what I understand, have various financial commitments that they really required this deal to go through in the next financial year. My theory, and again, this isn't 100% confirmed in any way, but I have had heard that Sporting, if it went through within a certain quicker time frame, would have to pay Man City a bigger sum of money for the deal, as they brought him from Manchester City. So I wonder, this is purely speculation because honestly I haven't been able to kind of pin down exactly on this whether this is true or not, this extra bit of money, but it's just what I'm told. And if that's the case, then by doing a loan and then a sale in the summer, perhaps that lessens that fee. And maybe that was part of the kind of machine that ended up getting this done. So what it is, it's a loan with an obligation to buy. And I think in total it's around 45 million euros, which is 39.5 million pounds. And the player's registration will be fully transferred on July the 1st. So obviously, it's really difficult this, because I understand, and I completely understand the frustrations of a lot of people suddenly when, oh, it's another loan, rubbish. And, oh, it's money that's not being spent now. I get that. I get the frustrations. I get where that's come from, especially if we're going to talk about this. If the financial results come out and they're absolutely loaded, it's going to look terrible. But what I would say is this, more than any other one, is very much loan in all, permanent deal in all but name. Because it's a loan for the financial aspect for Sporting. However, the way to maybe look at it is this deal, the way Spurs were trying to get it done, was always going to be paid in instalments anyway. So with this loan element of it, simply the loan fee ends up just really becoming the first instalment. Because it is only a loan for, what we're talking, 5 months? We're not talking about a loan that, let's say Kulusevski, that you could argue, yes, that's a loan that is over 2 seasons. That is definitely a longer term loan thing. Whereas with this being 5, 6 months, I think it's 5 months, isn't it? My maths is absolutely gone. When is July 1st? 6 months. So... No, it's 5 months, isn't it? Sorry about that. So essentially, really does. That loan fee works as the first instalment, and then obviously the next ones will come in kind of, and I'd imagine the way Sporting were holding out, I'd imagine there's going to be less instalments as well. I'd certainly heard at one point about it maybe being in 2 big instalments. So I kind of this narrative that I certainly would have gone down had it been a longer loan of, oh my goodness, they've spent nothing. I think you just have to look at it as a whole package. Because look, we could do the same if we're going to nail down with or drill down into, let's say, Richarlison, 60 million. If you want to kind of take that apart, you could say, well, there's about 10 million of that was potential add-ons. And then you could say that there's no, I can't imagine Spurs would have paid that all up front. So that will be in instalments as well. And it is the way that most club works. Even the big spending clubs, it's very rare to put all the money up front. I feel like there was some suggestions that maybe Newcastle were doing that with Anthony Gordon. And of course, you know, with somebody like the ridiculous spending that Chelsea have been doing, that may well have been the case. But yeah, it's just trying to explain that. Look, because sometimes these things get extracted and people only hear bits of these things. So I am not in any way or shape or form saying, oh, you know, they spend so much money or anything like this. I'm just explaining how transfer deals work. And I must stress, as I said at the top of this, did I feel they should have done more this window? Yes. Would it have been difficult? Yes. But, you know, I guess that's what big clubs do. So yeah, the other thing as well, there were also reports in Portugal that claim that Spurs have scaled down their sell-on clause for Marcus Edwards as part of the deal, down to about 30%, which was around 45%. Before that, it was originally 50%, but I'm pretty sure I remember that when Vitória sold Marcus Edwards to Sporting, as a condition of Spurs taking across the sell-on clause, I think they lost about 5% of it. I think, if I remember reading the statement that went up on one of the websites, I think it was Vitória's website that spoke about that. So I think it's gone down from around 45 roughly to 30. So yeah, so Sporting, you know, they're getting their money's worth here for the player. They're getting around £40 million. They're getting whatever that 15% or so of Marcus Edwards' clause ends up being. I feel like he does have an actual release clause as well. So I think there's only a certain amount they can get right now. But yeah, they got their man, Tottenham. They did. He will wear the number 23 shirt. And he is going to be a big weapon for Conte. There's no getting around it. Oh, please stay fit. That's a whole other thing. We're going to talk about what happens if he doesn't stay fit, but please stay fit. He's got 11 assists and 3 goals so far for the Sporting this season. So far more attacking output than probably all of Spurs' right wing backs combined, which is, of course, is absolutely no disrespect to Jed Spence because he's played about 41 minutes. But yeah, I think it's a fantastic signing. I do. Not only for the Conte era, but post-Conte era as well. I think Spurs have really, you know, there's a potential here that maybe he could be the man to finally fill Kyle Walker's shoes. But we'll see. It's very early days, potentially. Massive underlining of the word potentially. But yeah, exciting signing. I think he is. So, to make room for him, Spurs essentially took a wrecking ball to their right wing-back department. You just imagine Miley Cyrus swinging in on her, coming in like a wrecking ball and obliterating what came before. I must admit, it does make me chuckle slightly in a kind of a maniacal way. Maniacal laugh. People who watch the Muppet movie will get that one. The Emerson Royale, when at one point he was being huge cheers around the stadium that he was going off the pitch. It looked like his time at Tottenham was over. Spurs had been kind of very willing to get him out the door. Yet here we are, February the 1st, and Emerson Royale survived the cull. He did. And as I said, hinted at, you know, if something were to happen to Pedro Porro, Emerson Royale, I don't know why I said it like that. Emerson Royale becomes the first choice Tottenham right wing back. Whoa. And look, that's not to me. I don't like to dig into Emerson Royale too much because I do think he's been playing well recently. Some of his best performances, to be fair. But yeah, he's not the attacking wing back, of course. Of course he's not. But defensively, you know, he's going to offer you something. But I just find it bizarre that, I mean, let's start with Jed Spence. So 6 months, are we? He signed for Spurs ago. That was a terrible sentence, but you know what I mean. Labelled a club signing by Conte. To me, I think it was in South Korea. And it was just before he'd signed. We had to kind of hold on to the interview but it was for going out the next day, and we knew Jed Spence was about to sign. And the moment he said club signing, I was just like, oh no! I know what I've just managed to get out of him. It's your fault, Gold. Pretty sure it was to me. I'm sure it was in one of the questions I asked about something. It was about something else, and he actually started to offer up talking about Jed Spence, because we weren't going to ask about it because it wasn't done yet, and normally managers don't talk about this sort of stuff, and we all kind of looked at each other. But yeah, so 41 minutes of football, like I say, and he's already gone to Rennes on loan, which he'll be there with Joey Roden, like we're mates. Joe Roden, know him, do you? Yeah, and it's actually one of those that's ended up being, I think it's a really clever deal. I do. I think it's a clever deal from Jed Spence's side more than anything. What I have to make clear is, from what I understand throughout the whole process, neither Jed Spence or the club were willing to look at options to buy or obligations to buy in any of the loan deals. And I think, from what I understand, that's what kind of nixed any possibility of a Premier League move. Every Premier League offer they got either contained an option or an obligation to buy, I think, including they rejected certainly one from Brentford that had an obligation. And it's because Spurs believe that he can go on to still be a star, and Jed Spence is firmly of the opinion that he can be very successful at Tottenham, and this is just a bit of a hiccup, a kind of a bit in the road where he needs to head off in a slightly longer path around to improve, develop, and get himself kind of get that experience that either Conte, if he is still here next season, requires, or that the next manager will want. So what I understand is, when it came down to it at the end, Spence had the choice of 5 clubs from across Europe. He rejected Atletico Madrid. We'll come back to them shortly. And Sassuolo in Italy, because he wanted to go to Rennes. And some people might be like, what? Why would you reject Atletico Madrid? Bearing in mind, what a big club they are. Well, it's quite a clever move. The reason I say that is because it seems like he and his camp, maybe Spurs as well, they were armed with the knowledge that the Rennes captain, Hamari Traore, was having an MRI on an injury, and it showed that he's going to be out for a while. And it could be anything up to 2 months, I heard one person told me, potentially longer. And I think his backup is also out. I can't remember his name, but I think he's also out for 3 months. So it's a very clever move, because he's going to a club that are having a decent season. They're a club with a massive tradition of developing young players, signing young players that become absolute superstars. And he's going to really fill a hole for them. But also, they've got European competition as well. He's going to play almost every match. He could be playing 2. He could go from playing, not starting at all this season, to potentially starting 2 games a week. 3 games, technically, if you want to put it all together. So, yeah, I think it's a really clever deal. So, I always have to do my loan roundups. Guesty does them as well. We're going to have loads to look at. And, keep an eye on Jed Spence. I think it's going to be a really important, 4 months for him. He needs his confidence back as well. So, yeah, good move. Then there is the curious case of Matthew Doherty, or Doherty. I'll be honest, and I think this is shared by most people within the football club, including Matthew Doherty, and probably his mates Harry Kane and Eric Dyer. I don't think anyone expected Matt Doherty to be leaving the club this window. I don't think that was ever, in the early weeks, thought it was going to be likely. Towards later, as the window, you've probably heard me say in the videos, as the window went on, there was a bit like, well, Emerson has no real intention of going. So, what are we going to do? You're going to end up with 3 well-paid senior right wing backs, and only 1, occasionally 2, are going to play. So I think it became more and more of a possibility that maybe Doherty would have to go, especially if he was told, look, you're not going to get many more minutes this season. Yeah. And then late on, this, exit route occurred. And it was Atletico Madrid once again going, hello. Probably more of a Spanish accent. But, hello. That's weird. They've got a thing about Spurs fullbacks. I don't know what it is. They bought Kieran Trippier. Sergio Reguilon they took this season. They tried to get Emerson Royale last summer and again in this window, but he just wasn't having it. They tried for Jed Spence as well, like I said, and eventually they came around to Matt Doherty. That's when things got a bit messy. And I don't mean Lionel. I mean the Tottenham Hotspur kind of messy. So, I think it was late on Monday that he found out Atletico was a real option. And pretty much it was a case of get your passport, let's go. Tuesday morning, it was all kind of starting to fall into place that he'd be going there on a loan. All the noises coming out of Spurs were very much, it's going to be a straight loan, no obligation or option to buy. Just, he comes back in the summer and we see where we're at. Only, at some point during the process, it appears to be on Tuesday, someone realised that with Jed Spence heading out on loan, Spurs were going to reach the limit of, and it was recently imposed new FIFA rules, but they came into force this season. So they have been in place since July the 1st last year, that you can only have 8 players out on international loans at any one time. You can have 8 in and 8 out international. It used to be unlimited. I even responded, to be fair, I wasn't aware of it until yesterday. I even responded to someone on Twitter saying I think it's unlimited international loans in. But it appears that this rule came in and it is 8 either way. Domestic is different, obviously. I think domestic, certainly the Premier League, might even only be 2. All right, mate, make yourself comfortable. Sorry, and he's stretching out and kicking me while doing so. This is so weird when you can't see him. Hopefully you've seen the start of the video so you know he actually exists now. So somebody at some point realised that this was going to be the case. I'm sure Spurs will deny this to the absolute rafters and say, oh no, we were always aware. But something clearly changed. Let's just tally up these loans, right? Tanguy Ndombele, Giovanni Lo Celso, Sergio Reguilon, Brian Hill, obviously, who left as well on Monday. Talk about him. Harry Winks, Joe Rodon, as we mentioned, Destiny Udogie, and Jed Spence, becoming the last of them to go out. What is really important to note from all of that is that the club's transfer policies, work, whatever you want to say, has been so bad and their ability to sell players so awful that they've got 7 signings out on loan that cost them around £215 million. These £215 million worth of transfers sitting out there on loan, playing for other clubs and actually doing very well. Tonguy's probably going to win the Serie A. Lo Celso, obviously, I think he's now coming back from injury. Reguilon at Atletico Madrid. Brian Hill going back to his hometown club or his boyhood club. Even Harry Winks is back. Joe Rodon having a good season. Jed Spence will have a better season. Destiny Udogie having a decent season as well with Udinese. So all these players signed. They've pretty much gone elsewhere to enjoy themselves. 215 million. It's absolutely mind-boggling. And then you've got Harry Winks, who is an academy product, so he doesn't quite count in that. But what it all meant was that Matt Doherty, he could not go. He could not go on a loan. So a compromise had to be found. And I'll be honest, none of us expected it. I was made aware of this loan change. This loan rule late on yesterday, probably about almost 2 hours before the Doherty deal was done, and I was desperately trying to find out how it all worked. Yeah. And yeah, the noises I was getting back from it was, oh, it's all right, don't worry about it. And then presumably it was because by that point it had been decided that Spurs were going to mutually, with Matt Doherty, terminate his contract. Oh, can you imagine what, his besties, Harry Kane and Eric Dyer, thought about that when they heard the news? Well, I'm going to talk about the players in a minute because I do know how the players reacted to it. So yeah, mutually terminated. Even in their press release that they will have put on there, they email it out and you'll have seen it on their website. They weren't even able to say where he went. It was purely, we have mutually terminated his contract so he can join another club. And it's like, oh my goodness. But Doherty has gone from everyone expecting it to be him and Pedro Porro to he doesn't even play for Tottenham Hotspur anymore. It was such a scramble when that all happened. And there's so many aspects to this as well, because you could say, well, they did the same for Serge Aurier, 2021. But he had, I think it was under a year remaining on his contract. Matt Doherty had 18 months left on his deal. Loads of time left on his deal. And I think what will have to, Matt Doherty will have needed assurances that financially he'd be recompensed in case, because he's only signed for Atletico, I should stress this, on a 6-month deal until the summer. That's all it is. I don't know. There may well be that Atletico have got an option to extend that. It would be weird not to, and that may be in it. I don't know. But Matt Doherty would need to be covered financially by Tottenham in case he's out of contract and has no club in July. And he would also have to be really covered financially if he were to, let's say, he goes to another club. And there's a shortfall in his salary to what it would have been had he still been on the contract he had at Tottenham. So there's no way in the world that Matthew Doherty, I'm conteing him, I'm going to call him Matthew Doherty. There's no way that if I'm Matthew Doherty, I'm going, oh yeah, all right, nice one, yeah, I'll leave, I'll take less than whatever I was on. Yeah, all right, let's go. There's not what happens. There's no need for it. He doesn't, if Spurs are trying to push him out of the club, essentially, in that regard, regardless of whether it's Atletico Madrid, you're not going to go, oh, all right, yeah, no, I'll throw away potential earnings for the following year after this 6 months. So financially, Spurs will have had to strike a deal that means that his contract is covered. It's the only way to do it. But then there's even more to it than that, if you think about it, because the Spurs, in terms of in the football side of things, Spurs have lost a very popular senior player and a player who could do the job Conte was asked of him. Yes, he was having dips and stuff, but when he was peaking, sounds weird, like he's looking over a hedge, but when he was peaking, he was absolutely doing what Conte wanted from a wing-back. And you do wonder with a run of games whether he still would have been able to do that. And from what I understand, honestly, the Spurs players, his teammates, were absolutely shocked when they found out the news as Tuesday progressed. I've kind of heard the ways some of them found out, and the shocked phone calls, video calls, everything. Honestly, absolutely stunned. No one saw that one coming. But even away from the player side of things, Spurs have lost out on any potential fee they could have got for him. They've really written off a fee because he's gone on a free transfer. So let's say it was a loan, and then in the summer they might have decided, okay, sorry, we're going to go with Porro and Spence, let's say. Matt Doherty cost 15 million. I think he's now 31 maybe. So yeah, you're not talking much, but you are talking probably a couple of million, maybe 5 million. So that's gone. Spurs are now not able to get that unless there's this incredible turnaround in the summer where they sign him back on a free. The greatest return ever. Matthew Doherty. Can you imagine the announcement video for that one? Wow. So they've it makes the Porro deal even more expensive because one of the players he's replacing has just been written off. You can essentially take £3, £4, £5 million that they might have got in the summer off, I mean, with a year left in his deal, if he was having a really good end to the season, I still think, still think maybe you could get up to 5 million for him. So yeah, written off. Talking of announcement videos, wasn't a huge fan of the Porro one, I must admit. I'd imagine it's probably because it's aimed at a younger audience than me, or the AI chat stuff. I just kind of I found it a little bit like, was that it? And then making him look a bit daft at the end, dressed as Zorro, was a bit weird. But normally they nail those, and that was what made me think of it, was because Matt Doherty's one was superb. But yes, again, people far younger than me, who's clearly an old man, would have got it because they would do all the AI chat stuff, which I don't do. I wouldn't even know how to do it, actually. But I might have a look. So yeah, the other thing, just in case you weren't like, what? The other thing that Matt Doherty's exit means was that only Pierre-Emile Højbjerg remains in a Tottenham shirt this season from that summer transfer window of 2020 under Jose Mourinho. So let that sink in. An entire transfer window. So Gareth Bale, Joe Hart, Matt Doherty, Carlos Vinicius have all left permanently. Sergio Reguilon and Joe Rodon are away on loan. So just 2.5 years on, a near entire transfer window of work has already been not good enough by Spurs. It's just like a massively damning indictment of their efforts in the market. That is shocking that 2.5 years on, a whole window, barring one player, has gone from the club. Tottenham Hotspur, honestly, they are. What a club. What a club. I can't even, when I talk about the players out on loan and that £215 million worth, talk about that a whole summer, only 2.5 years ago, completely obliterated. It's just, they just don't operate in the best way. They just don't. There's no getting around it. The mistakes they made. Look, I know, it's all interlinked with changes of managers, but pick the right managers or back the right managers, whatever you want to call it. It all connects together, and it is part of a spider's web of daft decisions. And this is what they do. They do. This is what makes me chuckle when I'll sometimes have people saying, "Oh, you love Levy and all this sort of stuff." I'm constantly moaning about. I'm probably the most vocal reporter or journalist talking about Levy, the owners, Enoch, and there's daft things that they continuously seem to do. I don't know, but I don't know. I think people expect me to kind of sit here with a flag going Levy out or whatever. That's just not. I'm a journalist. I'm not. This isn't a fan cam channel. This isn't one of those kind of things. My aim with this is a journalist trying to objectively look at everything that goes on. I'm never going to kind of be aggressively calling for things and stuff like that. That's not what I am. My job is, I guess, is just to report on what I see and what Anyway, that's a whole other story. So, the changes that did come, like we say, came up front, mainly in attacking areas in this window. Obviously, they explored the possibility of Leandro Trossard. There were various things on that. There were claims that a bid had been actually made for him, but when I looked at the agent's comments, it didn't seem to suggest that. It seemed to be more that they were kind of contemplating a bid that never came. So I'm not entirely sure on that one. It could well be. I'm not entirely ruling it out. But if you look at the agent's comments, it never really seemed to confirm that there was this talk of like a 12 million bid or something, wasn't there, at one point? But it's difficult because, and I find this myself, that clubs will very rarely ever admit they had a bid rejected. Because why do they need to? And there's probably no proof that they actually have, because often a bid can be a verbal thing. I think this was the problem with the Porro deal. There's a lot of the agreements were verbally done, and then when they were put down in writing, things, changed or didn't quite fit what they originally thought they were going to do and stuff like that. So you can quite easily make out like a verbal offer never happened. It's very complicated. It makes reporting on it all quite complicated. But they did end up with Arnaut Danjuma, who strangely turned 26 on transfer deadline day of all days. Obviously plucked him away from Everton. I did feel sorry for poor Guesty, my colleague, who's a big Everton fan. And I tell you what, if we want to talk about fans going through it, my goodness, Guesty's just like, I think you can see sometimes like, what are people moaning about when he talks about any other club pretty much, including Spurs, because Everton, that's a mess. Spurs can be properly messy, as I say, but Everton, wow. Who knows if they're even going to be a Premier League club come the end of the season. But yeah, so Danjuma had done pretty much everything there. He even done media stuff, apparently. Plucked away. Tottenham took him down the country to themselves. Loaned from Villarreal, but with a €24 million, £21.2 million option to buy. And I do think he's going to be an important player. Less of a first-team immediate upgrade than Porro, of course. But I do think for Conte, big sigh from Indy. He's not impressed with Danjuma. The fact that he's very skillful, big, talented, strong. He's going to really run it. I saw this little compilation. It was a really small compilation, but it was just one of his Netherlands performances where he does this incredible move at pace to beat a man as he's getting by him. And obviously, we know he's already off his mark. He scored against Preston as well, off the mark. And I think, as much as it pains me to see Bryan Hill go out the door, I'm going to talk about him in a second, that Danjuma comes in. I think if I'm Conte, I said it before, but he's looking across at his bench and he's not seeing a small child. He is seeing a big grown man. And he is thinking, yes, Danjuma, I will put you into this game of men. I'm massively simplifying it and being very unfair to Conte, who's not well at the moment, so I'll stop doing that. But I don't think it's any shock if you asked him to pick between a small 21-year-old player with potential and a big 26-year-old who has got Champions League experience, etc. And although technically Bryan Hill has now as well. And is someone that you can throw into the physical element of a game. Spent a couple of years at Bournemouth. He knows what it is to kind of battle away. He's going to pick Danjuma. So now he has that important option, I think, on the bench, as well as Richarlison and Lucas maybe will have back. Depends how his fitness continues this week. But yeah, so I do think Danjuma is going to be, it could be a real pivotal one because, he's going to push on Sonny, I think. He'll be extra competition for him. Is it any coincidence that Sonny had a cracking game against Preston? Maybe, maybe not. And also, just to give variety, also to give Kane a rest at times as well. We saw him come on as a central striker against Preston, looked absolutely fine in the role. So it's going to allow players not to have to play full 90 minutes. It's going to have them watching their backs, and it's all about driving the competition. So I do think he's a good signing. A proper, got so excited. A proper try before you buy. And, if he is a success, 21.2 million for a very good attacking player in the Premier League is nothing. It's a snip. So yes, Bryan Hill. He has returned to Sevilla. If anyone saw my tweet when it was announced, it was Ari Gold from Entourage looking at his phone and smashing against the wall. Because, it is a ridiculous situation. It is a ridiculous situation. It does mean that in selling Bryan Hill to Spurs back in 2021, Sevilla have ended up with £21 million, Eric Lamela, and Bryan Hill back again. It's a great deal if you can get it. It is a ridiculous deal. And yet again, one of these Tottenham transfer deals where you're like, what? And he's a talent. I can understand them going for him. But then to be put in a situation where he's going to play for a manager who can compare him to Bernardo Silva. He can give him minutes when we know there's no one else available, fine. But ultimately, he was never going to be a regular player. And, and you could see that. Bryan Hill wanted to go. He wanted to go back to Spain. I was looking through his press conference quotes, and they are a young man so happy to be home. I get the impression his family have constantly been telling him he needs to go back, and here he is back home. And if he has a great time, and whether there's a manager change or not at Spurs, if I'm Bryan Hill and I have a brilliant end of the season back at my boyhood club, I think he joined them when he was 9, he'll probably be pushing to try and stay. And I wonder whether Sevilla end up signing him back. maybe Spurs will get £21 million and Eric Lamela, and then loan Brian Hill next season. Oh my goodness. Honestly, I don't think it's a coincidence as well that Brian Hill and Jed Spence have both gone out on loans without options to buy. I do think that's an element of Conte's future being unclear, that both they'll re-examine that in the summer and see where they're at. Yeah. I mean, people have been saying it the other way. Is it that Spurs have been reticent in bringing players in because of Conte and they've done try before you buy? I don't think that's clearly the case with Porro. That is permanent. That's a permanent transfer. It just purely has the label loan on it when it's kind of really not what it is, but it's not. It is. Yeah, you know what I mean. Danjuma, yes, maybe more so. But yeah, it's a difficult one because obviously the other options were someone like Zaniolo. But I think the Spurs were trying to push for exactly the same kind of thing. So there's going to be an element maybe of Conte's future, but I also think there's an element of bringing players into the Premier League and not knowing whether they're going to adapt. Danjuma's only experience of Premier League football was his first season at Bournemouth when he was very young and he didn't score any goals, 14 games. Obviously, he's a very different player to than he was then now. But yeah, you just don't know what's going to happen, I guess. There was another arrival in the window. Spurs signed the young Chelsea forward Jude Sunsup-Bell. I can't remember if I mentioned in the last video or not. I may not. Maybe I said that they were going to get a youth player. I can't remember at that point whether I'd got the name or not. No, I think maybe I did. Oh, I can't remember. Doesn't matter. But they got him. They saw off competition from Man City, wanted him, and a few other clubs across Europe wanted him as well. As soon as I kind of put that story out, people were like, whoa, why would Chelsea want to get rid of him? He can't be that good. He kind of is. He is. I mean, he's probably I would say his progress has stalled slightly, but he's definitely adapting to the Premier League 2, which was the next level. And I think in the academy level, it's only like 23 goals in 25 games at under 18s. Whereas the last season and a half or so, he's been adapting to that next step. But this is a young man, he's only 19, turned 19 this month, who's very, very highly regarded. Thomas Tuchel gave him his Carabao Cup debut, his Chelsea debut last season. But what had happened was he was getting towards the end of his contract. Chelsea wanted him to stay, very highly regarded. They offered him a new deal, but he looked at it and thought, I don't think I'm going to get through here. I don't think you're ever going to play me in this first team. And with his contract getting into the final 6 months, Chelsea had to really, they were going to lose him for nothing in the summer. So they had to agree something. I don't think they would have ever envisaged doing so with Spurs, but that's who it ended up being because that was the club that Sunsup-Bell chose. And what's happened now is he's moved on a free transfer with Chelsea getting a sell-on clause. I'm not entirely sure how much, but there's a sell-on clause involved as well. And the idea is that he'll initially come into the academy side and he'll give them another attacking threat. Obviously, the under-21 struggling this season, and he'll contribute goals for them. All part of his development. And then I think the plan, from what I understand, is in the summer he'll be sent out on loan to start getting his proper first team experience before they look at whether he's kind of ready to come into the first team environment. You'd imagine in the summer maybe he'd be involved in friendlies and possibly a pre-season tour. Maybe that could have been something that was not promised but suggested could happen to him in signing. I think he's going to be a really good young player. It's just awkward, isn't it, that I felt so sorry when his announcement came and everyone was kind of waiting for Porro. It just all gets buried, and we know there's certain fans of any club that only really care what happens at first team level. That's just what they do. They don't care what happens at a youth team level until that player suddenly comes into the team and then they're great. And often you'll find that they don't give them long patience-wise, and then they're bombed out. Because it's weird, isn't it? It works both ways. Sometimes there's players that maybe you feel get away with it because they're English and like domestic player. But sometimes I think it goes the other way. And if they had Eno on the end of their surname, they'd actually get less flack than they do in a little bit more patience. It's just funny the way it works. I do think we're all a little bit, and myself included, harsh to judge younger players. I think we are. But hopefully, Sunset Bell goes on and becomes, something special for Spurs in the years ahead. Got quite a few young players, with Dane Scarlett and Troy Parrott as well. These young strikers are starting to amass. Jamie Donnelly's a superb young player as well. We'll see what happens. They also showed interest in Thierry Small, his Southampton 18-year-old defender, early in the window, left back, but they didn't follow up on that as the weeks wore on. Maybe because he was small, and Conte maybe doesn't like small players. No, that wasn't it. But he ended up going on loan to St Mirren to get first team experience. But yeah, he's another one that's quite a highly regarded young player. I think there was some kind of hopes that he was going to start pushing into the Southampton first team soonish, probably next season. So I think Spurs were looking at maybe getting in there. But yeah, no, I was kind of told quite early on yesterday that wasn't something that was going to be kind of reignited this window. Maybe something they look at in the future. Some young players did head out of Spurs. Harvey White finally has got his loan move that he really needed. 2 years after he went to Portsmouth on loan. He had 6 clubs, I understand, to decide from right at the end. And he's gone to Derby, which is a great move for him. It's another step up in his development. Really, really good loan. I'm excited to see what he does there because he's kind of had to make up the numbers for Spurs in the last 2 seasons. Yes, he got his Premier League debut at Palace, but it was almost felt like a bit of a token gesture. Oh, thanks for everything, Harvey. And he's better than that. He's 21 years, but he's incredibly versatile, can play anywhere in midfield, really, at all, including attacking, box-to-box or defensive. He can play on the left, he can play at left back. We've seen him used as a false 9 by Conte in friendlies as well. He is, really good young player. And I think this will be a massive opportunity for him now to push on and show what he can do. Alfie Devine didn't end up going out on loan. There was a lot of interest in him. 18-year-old, very talented attacking midfielder. Well, he's another one that is quite versatile. He can play in a bit of a deeper role as well. I think it was decided, I think I mentioned this right at the start of the season, that there were 2 elements to this potential loan. He picked up a hamstring injury, which is why he didn't end up going out on loan in summer. But the thing that they all had to decide was he desperately does need a loan. He's at that stage where he needs a loan, I think, in first team football. But the flip side is that this season represented the final season that he had to complete as a Tottenham player, actually present as a Tottenham player rather than away on loan. Because if he does the 3 years, he then becomes club-trained, homegrown player in all competitions going forward, especially obviously in Europe. So that's a big thing for him to open up doors, for him to be involved in European squads and everything. So I think they've looked at it and just thought, you know what? If he goes out to a Football League club, he's going to get about 3 months. Their season ends, end of April? He's only going to get about 3 months' worth of football. Is it worth it for 3 months when this can set him up for the future to be part of the numbers in all of these squads? So I think that looks like that's the way the thinking has gone. And obviously also the fact that the academy, the development side isn't doing too well. So it needs a player of his quality. And then obviously in the summer, they can then decide maybe involve him quite a bit in pre-season and then potentially head out on a loan there as a kind of a more, I think he's maybe August the 1st. I can't remember when his birthday is. I feel like it is August when he'll be 19. So yeah, that bit more maturity to head out on loan and have a more of a developmental kind of period. There was a late departure. Adam Hayton, 18-year-old goalkeeper. He's left permanently for Barnsley. He only signed his first pro deal about 6 months ago as well, so he's headed out there. In terms of potential deals that didn't go through in the first team, I know that towards the end Spurs were quite willing to let Lucas Moura and Davinson Sanchez go. That was mainly contract related. Lucas Moura obviously now in the last 6 months of his deal and Spurs hadn't taken up the option. Obviously he's had an injury ravaged season as well. And with big Davinson Sanchez, he's only got 18 months left on his. So I do think there was some element of trying to find them deals, but I think a bit of a reticence from the players right now as well. You know, Davinson Sanchez obviously just captained the side in the FA Cup, actually played very well against Preston. And I do think it's a case of, had either of them decided to go, you'd have had to replace them. I think both players. And I know everyone takes shots at Davinson Sanchez, digs at him and everything. But it would be quite difficult, I think, to find a guaranteed Premier League ready player to replace him. It's not as easy as it sounds. Big Dav, he makes mistakes. Yes, he does. Sometimes silly mistakes. But I also think that he's far better than people actually give him credit for. It's just those mistakes. And I know that's an important thing. And I know that they can be crucial, especially when you're playing at the back. But I do think he's better than people give him credit for. And I know that people will be listening to this going, you moron, what are you saying? He's trash or all this sort of stuff. But I always feel he's been a little bit harshly done by. There's been so many times he's come in and done a job, not least at the end of last season, start of this one as well. With Lucas, from what I understand, he had offers, I think, from a couple of Premier League clubs, a very lucrative one from a club in Qatar, I think, as well. But nothing really persuaded him that now was the time to go. I guess if he's a free agent in the summer, he's pretty much going to have his wide kind of range of offers that you can choose from, probably with all of them having big signing on fees. So yes, look, if Lucas can get back to any kind of fitness and he becomes an option, suddenly that bench has Danjuma, Richarlison and Lucas on it, and that's, well, it may have Kulusevski, Kane or Son as well. You know, you're able to rotate. Suddenly there's a lot of different game-changing players on there. So yeah. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world now, especially with Brian Hill having to go. I probably would have preferred Brian Hill to Lucas to stay, in terms of Brian Hill having a higher ceiling for me, and also looking quite bright recently too, but it was not to be. Who else? Oliver Skipp, I think, was quite open to a loan move from what I understand, just to get his match sharpness back, really, because he obviously had those injuries, hadn't played much, still hasn't played much. And funnily enough, I think we just started to see against Preston. I know it was Preston, it's not a Premier League team, but I just thought he came on and looked really sharp and was playing a lot of those forward balls that I know he can play as well. I've seen him do it for the academy many, many years. And so, yeah, I think he was quite willing, from what I understand, to head out on loan. Palace, Fulham, Leeds, Bournemouth, all looking to take him if they could. But Conte said no. He wanted the cover in midfield, and he does rate Skippy. Obviously, he's got Pablo Matasar at the moment, has got a little hip injury, which has kept him out of recent games as well. And I think the two of those are vying on that pecking order ladder to be the kind of the other man alongside Basuma on the bench in the central midfield. But yeah, so Skippy stays. But yeah, I mean, just looking over the squad now, there's two in every position. That's the main thing. I would say they're in a better position than they were. Yeah, I just think they were. I was about to say after the end of last January, I think it's a more balanced, better squad than it was after last January's transfer window. And I think you'd probably have to say it is since the summer window. I do think they've done enough to improve it. Porro is a game changer for them. He could be the potential Benton Kulusevski one. And I do think Danjuma is going to be a more battle-ready option for Conte in terms of changing games as well. So I think they are two good signings. And this is why I'm not going to say it's the worst window. I've seen some people saying it's like a 1 or a 2 out of 10 windows. No, it's not. I do think that they're potentially season-altering signings. But, of course, centre-back still feels like an area of missed opportunity for me. It really does. Look, I know what Tottenham's answer will be, that there's no point. Their main options that they wanted to sign were not available in this window, and, you know, there's no point just kind of chucking your money on a 6th, 7th choice player in the window just for the sake of bringing someone in who may not be better than what you have. Look, I know there's people who are going, anyone's better, but that isn't the case, especially because sometimes these players that look amazing in foreign leagues, they come to the Premier League and they go, and they absolutely are not able to replicate what they've done. You know, I was going to say touch wood, but there isn't really any. There is over there. Pedro Porro. Pedro Porro may not be able to translate what he's done in Portugal here. That is a risk. However, they will hopefully have scouted him and think that that's not going to be the case, because all of their foreign transfers have always worked out really well. But yes, that is the risk, though. That is the risk I think you take with any foreign signing. It's adaptation to a very different culture and style of football as well. So, in my report about the January transfer priorities, obviously, I've said this a billion times, the summer plans, 2 centre-backs, one for the left, one for the right or centre, and securing a long-term goalkeeper successor to Hugo Lloris. So, if you look at that and you think, okay, we'll bring that forward now. We want that to happen in January. And I include myself in this. I would have liked to see a centre-back upgrade. We know that their top targets, at least in the last year, have been Josko Gvardiol from RB Leipzig and Alessandro Bastoni. We know that, Inter Milan. They also made an inquiry this month about Bayer Leverkusen's Piero Hincapie. I'm going to say Hincapie, but someone in the comments told me how to pronounce it. I've completely forgotten. It may be a silent C or a soft C, as it were. I know they're also huge admirers of Marc Guéhi at Palace. How many names can I mispronounce? That's going to be the target for the day. None of those 4 players I've just mentioned were available in the January window. They weren't. You know, you can talk about throw silly money at it, but even someone like Piero Hincapie, there's talk that he was up to 80 million. Because of his World Cup performances. 80 million on a 6-foot centre-back who you don't know whether he could definitely handle the Premier League is a huge gamble. Whereas maybe you think, well, let's get to the summer and some of those names might be more readily accessible and we can get them. There's so few clubs want to lose their players in the January window. This is the whole Porro dilemma, was trying to get him away. It was so difficult. So I get it. There is every part of me that wanted a centre-back, but I get it. If you're looking at top targets, no. You know, Bastoni, we know, is probably, unless he signs a new deal, is going to be someone they're going to try again for in the summer. Gvardiol, you'd imagine with the Chelsea and City interest, that's going to be a very, very difficult one to do. But and also Marc Guéhi, it'd be an interesting one. England international is going to be worth a big amount of money. There'll be competition for him. If there's any display that Palace might be, or hint that Palace might be willing to sell him. So, yeah, I do think the summer is better in that regard. Funnily enough, there's one player who, I'm just going to say, they've released training photos. I just wanted to see, as I'm doing it, anyone in there? Lucas in there getting lots of hugs from Eric Dyer. So perhaps that means that we've got that run of games from Lucas. Run of days, of good days from Lucas, and he's back out there with him. That would be a big thing. I'm just trying to see if I can access the rest of the training photos as we speak, because that would be quite a nice thing to see. Whether you'd imagine young Pedro will be able to be in there. No, they haven't got on there. If it pops up as we go on, I'll put out one of Emerson Royale. I'm not even going to look at the comments underneath, but I will later because I'll be fascinated to see how that's being taken. But yeah, so when it comes to centre-backs, there is one that for me is a bit like, ooh, why didn't you? So you would have heard me say, I think I was the first one to say this last summer, was it? That I know that Spurs have extensively scouted and really, really, really like Ilya Zabani, the young Ukrainian centre-back. He's 20 now. You will have noted that at the end of deadline day, he signed for Bournemouth for £20 million. why didn't Tottenham go for him? I was wondering this. The only things I could think of were maybe they thought, is there any point in signing another young prospect for Conte that he may not use? Maybe. Maybe there's a thinking that Bournemouth may go down, and this is a way to almost look at how he does in the Premier League, and then maybe you go in for him in the summer when Bournemouth need to let him go because, you know, obviously going down into the Championship. If that's the case, they might not go down, but if they do, it's a gamble for me. That is a gamble. I guess they could say it's a gamble bringing a young player for 20 million, but they've done that many times before, and everything I keep hearing about Zabani is that he's going to be a bit of a star. So I wonder whether Spurs are going to really feel like they've missed a trick here. Keep an eye on Zabani. He's the one, I would say more than anyone else, that maybe you think, I don't know, you let Japhet Tanganga head out on loan. There was a lot of interest in Japhet Tanganga. Maybe you let him head out on loan and you bring in Zabani as that kind of that younger player who's going to get minutes here and there as you slowly develop him. It may well be that he looked at the thoughts, the options, and thought, well, Bournemouth, I'm going to play quite regularly compared to anywhere else. But yeah, that's the one for me. Whereas I can accept the top targets not being available, but for him, clearly there was a move there to be done, and that's the one for me. I'm a bit like, I can't see how you can explain that one away. But yeah, so that's the transfer window, which was a strange transfer window because on top of that, we all we had the Fabio Paratici stuff, 30-month ban from the Italian Football Federation, with Spurs still bracing themselves for it to be extended longer globally by UEFA and FIFA, not longer but globally. I'm still intrigued to see whether we're going to have a transfer window wrap from him, with him talking over the window, because that's going to be awkward. Talking of awkward, I've spoken to a lot of agents in the last week or so who have really been surprised when they've either been in meetings with Spurs or they've spoken like conference calls over the phone. And Paratici has been very heavily involved and leading things as well. I think there's certainly a few agents that I know that are like, oh, okay, so this is still happening, okay, kind of thing. But I guess until someone makes a decision, or maybe whether they wait and find out what appeals and stuff like that, I guess, he would still continue in his role. And I think there's just a surprise, though, that everything's very much business as normal, despite that verdict in Italy. We may well find that, now the transfer window's closed, something happens on that front. We'll have to see exactly how that kind of plays out. But it's just been another Spurs saga, a messy saga going on in the background. And yeah, it's the fact that Conte isn't doing that press conference, or you'd think won't do the press conference on Friday. Well, we're now kind of robbed of hearing his thoughts about the window. I would have hoped that he would say, because last time he very much said it was a balanced squad now with Kudus and Bentancur, but he was very much, but numerically, I'm really disadvantaged because I had the 4 players go out on loan in Ndombele, Lo Celso, Dele, obviously went permanently, and Bryan Hill. So they did lose 4 players from one position, and we ended up with academy players, seeing them on the bench for the remaining matches of the season. So yeah, I think he would point out surely that this is a stronger squad, I think, across the positions. But I would expect he would still point towards the spending of others and how Tottenham have to do things in a different way. And I mean, yeah, of course, you look at Chelsea. I mean, I was talking to our Chelsea reporter, Adam, and I was looking at their deals. £340 million they've spent this month on 9 players, albeit one of them coming in the summer. And there's obviously Nkunku, who looks like that's done for the summer as well, but hasn't been officially announced. honestly, they're just been an absolute ridiculous. Just been ridiculous. It's just. I've never seen anything like it in a January window. That sort of money spent by one club. It's difficult to see a strategy in it, but Graham Potter has now got the most ridiculous squad to pick from. I joke about Guesty and I having to work out all the Champions League regulations and registrations. Chelsea are stuffed in that regard. They can only register 3 of their new players for the Champions League because that's the limit, 3, which is why Spurs are able to put Porro and Danjuma in. Doesn't matter if you've played in the competition before, you can still play in it. Spurs now, with Doherty going, they're right on the 17 foreign players that you need for that, or non-locally trained. But Chelsea, honestly, no idea how they're registering players. I really, and obviously the Ziyech deal fell through as well by the sounds of it to PSG. Amazing. But Spurs fans, and we'll look at that, and they will look at the huge money. So it is a bit of an anomaly. I would say they're a bit weird, Chelsea, in terms of that they are so different to what all the other clubs have been doing. But then, Arsenal, I think they spent around 60 million and there was clearly an intent to try and buy Caicedo from Brighton, and they were offering, sounds like 60, 70 million for him. That didn't happen. They went for Jorginho in the end, but again, another club not willing to let a player go in January. And I think the fans will see these kind of attempts at big moves even, and they'll judge Spurs for that in relation to those two. And I think maybe even more so when these financial results are finally released. They've long been ready, and we know that. So, intrigued to see what that brings, and there's going to be some fallout from that as well. I can't imagine it's going to be a worse financial result because of everything that's come back into play, like a full stadium that is a cash-generating machine of a stadium. It really is. I guess if you're going to play devil's advocate, Spurs will probably look at it and say, they'll point to their other rivals around them and they'll say, Man U, 3 loan deals. One of those a backup goalkeeper. Newcastle spent roughly the same as Spurs if we are including the Porro deal as a whole rather than just the loan fee, which look, I know people are going to say, this money comes out in the summer, this money comes now, and all this sort of stuff. And there's talk about, but the Kulusevski and Porro deal, they'll be part of a separate thing. I don't think that's really the way that clubs look at it. I don't think it is. I'd be shocked if that's the way that they kind of parcel it up. I think they will have looked at this window as, right, we're guaranteed we have to pay just under £40 million for Porro. But I could be wrong. But so let's say we are taking that together. Newcastle spent roughly that because of the Gordon deal. Man City have only paid £8 million. They're one young player that they got. Is the Argentina? I'm trying to remember who it was now. Liverpool, £35.4 million they spent on Gapco. So, again, both just buying the one player. So, in terms of in relation to their rivals around them, it is only really City and Arsenal and Chelsea that you can say, yes, have shown, I guess, more ambition. But then you could argue that some of those other clubs, I guess, didn't need as much tweaking as Spurs do. But we'll find out, because I do think those financial results show huge profits. I think the Spurs fans will only take one opinion away from them, and that's you could have done more. And I do think that's clearly the worry from Spurs, because they would have put those results out sooner. They really would have done. We'll see. We'll see. Like I said, I really do feel that the transfer window had made some progress, but there could have been more. But like I said, I think I say that every single window. That there's just one more I would have liked, and I'll probably be saying it for many more windows to go if Spurs don't kill me off. Now it's about, I guess, I suppose you could argue as well. Conte said himself that the transformation will take place across multiple transfer windows, so this will be closer to the squad that he wants. But we're going to find out on the pitch over the next 4 months or so whether the progress is quick enough, not only for Conte, for Harry Kane as well, when the Spurs will no doubt, with the transfer window out of the way, will now be able to concentrate on offering him a new contract as well. And I guess whether it happens fast enough for Daniel Levy and ultimately Tottenham, because if the fans aren't happy, it's just going to get more and more and more uncomfortable for Daniel Levy, and who knows kind of how that ends up. Kind of talking about the club and finances, there was one little, as a piece of housekeeping, I did see there's a report in South Africa about the South African government, through its marketing agency SA Tourism, preparing to sponsor Spurs for 910 million South African rand, which in English money is about £42.5 million. I think, unless I'm wrong, I think Arsenal has got a kind of a tourism sponsor in Rwanda. Don't they have that? I'm sure I remember seeing Visit Rwanda and all this sort of stuff. So where this has all come from, the South African media outlet Daily Maverick claimed that they've seen documents from a presentation given by SA Tourism this month for a 3-year sponsorship, and it was supposed to be discussed further at another presentation which would have been last night. And the Daily Maverick believes it's close to being finalised and that the deal could even be announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa during his State of the Nation address on the 10th of February. They also claimed that the documents state that the £42.5 million deal would run from possibly as soon as February now to June 2026, with the option to extend for another year. What I would say is there was a little update on the bottom of the story, and there was a government minister mentioned in it a lot, and it was kind of quite attacking them, the story. And she kind of gave a bit of a rebuttal to it all. But the only thing that she did say that did actually kind of link that there was something going on with Spurs, she said, or the statement said, essentially the SAT, the South African tourism proposal, is to conclude a memorandum of understanding with Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. It is non-binding. Such a proposal must still pass muster within the Tourism Ministry and is subject to the concurrence of National Treasury to conform to government prescripts. So there's something going on there. Even the minister, in saying that there were inaccuracies within the story, or claiming there were inaccuracies, did mention there's something going on with Spurs. So we will see what happens. Spurs just have this policy of anything commercial, you can't get anything out of them, pretty much. They will not comment on any commercial matters, especially rumours, so nothing coming from them. And it's a difficult one to really find too much about stuff like that, because of it will be kind of very directly done with South Africa if it's happening, or the government. So we'll find out. We shall find out exactly what that leads to and whether it brings any more from it, because obviously £42.5 million brought in just purely from saying, go to South Africa. It is not too shabby at all. Also in the story, it suggested that this has been a long-running thing, that Spurs have been trying to get South Africa on board. But we'll still see. It's very much, at the moment, it's just a report, and we'll see if anything more comes of it. What else? Club response to the Trust. Trust have said is coming tomorrow, so that'll be interesting. We'll finally find out exactly what how they're addressing those. I think it was 4 points that the Trust made to them. So that'll be interesting. Obviously, I'll include that in my next video. And like I say, I wonder whether we end up with a Paratici... all right, mate. Sorry, Indy's adjusting himself. Whether we end up with a Paratici transfer wrap or not. Because I don't know if Daniel Levy's going to want to put himself in the way to do something like that. Unless it's just it ends up being a written one by Paratici. I don't know. We'll find out. Where it may come today, it might come tomorrow. We shall see. But yeah, we are now approaching the hour-and-a-half mark. I think that's probably as good a transfer window wrap as I can do. And it wasn't me spitting bars, as I suggested. Not that kind of wrap. And you got to see my dog at the start of the video, which people are going to think is very strange, but he does exist. I just thought, as he happened to be sitting up at the time, I would quickly pull his head into shot. So there you go. Right. Let's see what happens. Let's see what this window brings. I can't even give it a mark out of 10 right now, because it's still the unknown. We don't know how these two players are going to fit in. because, yeah, Kulusevski and Bentancur, in the moment, it was a bit like, oh, okay. And then it was like, whoa, after like first couple of games. So it would be fantastic if Porro has a great introduction, and Danjuma obviously continuing, gets his Premier League debut. Porro, of course, coming against Man City, his old club, in his first game potentially as well. So I've just seen Matt Doherty, I think, has done his press conference in Madrid. Best of luck to him. It really should be. I hope he has a great loan. I really do. He seems like a great guy. Whenever I've kind of spoken to him, interviewed him, he seems like a really good chap. So I really do wish him the best. And obviously wish the best to Antonio Conte. Hopefully we hear some good news on him in the next 24 hours or so. And hopefully have him back up on his feet. And obviously he's a very mobile, emotional man. So if he's not able to move, that's going to be very, very difficult for him. I think someone was saying maybe it depends on what kind of surgery, whether it's keyhole surgery or open surgery and things like that. So we'll know more. Just the main thing, obviously, is that he recovers quickly and gets healthy and well, because it must have been incredibly painful. So yeah, right. I'm going to head off now. I shall probably it'll have to be post Sunday, so probably not another video till Monday, and so unless something massive comes out. Maybe we'll see if the financial results maybe demand a little bit more explanation. We'll see. See how it all works out this week. But there you go. Right. Well, goodbye from myself and Indy today. And as always, stay healthy, stay safe, look after yourselves. I shall catch you later. Goodbye.